Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer. Today I've got something entirely different for you. 10 awesome builds I've never done before in Elden Ring. Before we jump into this video, be sure to check out the description for some links to help support the channel, including 20% off of Gfuel when using the code YourAverageGamer. There's even an Elden Ring inspired Gfuel. For the first build, I've never made a build for Rosus' axe. This is a powerful one where we'll be taking on Radahn, and as usual, all of the footage is on New Game Plus 7. This weapon's Ash, which is essentially the Ash of War Tibia summons, has two factors to it. The slam down on the weapon that scales with strength, and the spirit, which scales with intelligence. Weapon AR seems to matter to a degree, but I only saw a slight increase in the Ash from two-handing it. The summons part can be boosted by the Magic Scorpion Charm, and the Ash as a whole by the Shard of Alexander and Ritual Swords Talisman. This is a powerful option for large targets and does substantial damage when landing the entire Ash of War. Rosus' axe took me by surprise as I haven't used it much since launch time, and finally optimized it for awesome damage in a solid, well-rounded build with 60 vigor. This is certainly a powerful build and absolutely worth a try. You're going to see on Radahn here how much damage we can get, especially with Terra Magica mixed in, which will boost the magic part of it, which is the summons. The regular slam down seems to be more affected by strength scaling, which makes sense. So it's pretty split between strength and intelligence, but when you put it all together, we two-handed at 40 strength to get to 60 and 40 intelligence, we end up with a really powerful build that can hit large targets hard. And this axe, as I mentioned earlier, is something that I hadn't really used since around launch time, and using it again now with the right scaling and equipment to boost it and having a lot more knowledge on the game as far as Elden Ring goes, this ended up being a really reliable Ash of War for this fight, and I was surprised at how much damage it did. Now, I did go on, and I didn't include it in this video because this video has 9 other builds, but I went and tried some of the smaller bosses and stuff in the game with this. It's not as good against them because they're all not going to hit, right? The Tibia summons or whatever, and then the axe itself, it's a little bit more difficult to land, but on the bigger bosses like you can see here, you can absolutely destroy them with the Ash of War. I think I called it Rosus' axe, or the Rosus axe, however it's said, but we're going to get into equipment here for this awesome build and setup that can do a lot of damage to big bosses. For equipment, we had Rosus axe plus 10 preferably. Any seal, any staff will do. You're using Terra Magica. We have the Tree Sentinel set on Erdtree's Favorite plus 2, Ritual Swords Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Magic Tier, Faith Tier. Let's get into stats. By the way, if you're wondering how I sound, I have a little bit of a cold right now. We're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and then Terra Magica, and then we have 60 Vigor, 40 Strength, and 40 Intelligence for a well-rounded build. The next one up here is the Naginata, one that I once did an early game build for, but never a rune level 150 build. I decided to run it as a dexterity build, given that it has an A in Keen Affinity while also adding in Blood Flame Blade. Repeating Thrust is a solid Ash for this with a lot of range and can build up bleed quickly with Blood Flame Blade. This Ash of War and the weapon itself made for a well-rounded bleed build based off the Naginata, which again it has such substantial reach, and you can get I think around 95 bleed with Blood Flame Blade and Keen Affinity. It's I think between 90 and 95 bleed in total. I highly recommend this setup for those who like this weapon, as the range was nice with the bleed build-up being quite good too. The Naginata can also be grabbed early in Gale Tunnel, in Caelid, and repeating Thrust reasonably early too, making for a strong build that can last the majority of Elden Ring. And in a second here, we're going to go over equipment and everything for this build and setup, and this is a powerful one if you want decent bleed and a little bit of reach with the Naginata and repeating Thrust. We have Keen Affinity Naginata with repeating Thrust. Any seal will do. We have the White Mask on, a random armor set. We have 51 poise, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Melissen's Prosthesis, Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Ritual Swords Talisman, Thorny Tier, Faith Tier. Let's get into stats. Once again, we're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blood Flame Blade, and here we hit 75 Dexterity in total, and we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 27 Endurance for a well-rounded Dexterity build on the Naginata. The third build we have here is the Watchdog Staff, one in which I've used several times but never posted it on my channel. The Watchdog Staff is actually quite good, giving you projectiles that don't scale with intelligence, but instead weapon level and AR to a small degree. Unfortunately though, much like the Ruin's Greatsword and Falling Star Beastjaw, weapon level is the primary factor in damage, essentially capping it in damage, because when you go on a New Game Plus and whatnot, you're not going to get that much out of the weapon AR and everything else involved with your stats, even strength scaling, so it's mainly going to be weapon level, and once you hit around plus 10, you're going to nearly max out the damage. That being said, it's still incredibly useful and easy to use, as the Ash is powerful enough and very easy to dodge and roll out of and set up again. This one actually exceeded my expectations in combat due to how fast it is, and ultimately made for a solid, well-rounded strength build that gives you a range option to use too. Yeah, if you're looking for something that's powerful as a build but not ridiculously overpowered, something you can utilize in combat as a strength build that also gives you ranged projectiles that do a decent amount of damage, the Watchdog staff is definitely something worth trying. Let's get into equipment here. For equipment, we have the Watchdog staff plus 10 preferably, any seal will do. The Spellblade set will boost the damage on this. Ritual Shield Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Magic Tier, Faith Tier. Let's get into stats for this build. This is not an intelligence build, even though the Spellblade set does boost it. I was boosting the damage with Golden Vow on Halashaburi, so I did some buffs too, and I hit 60 strength. But again, keep in mind, this doesn't scale much with weapon AR, it's more weapon level, so when you have the stats you need for the weapon, you can run this build pretty much exactly for the same damage. Build number 4 is the straight sword, fire, and frost build. I chose the Warhawk's Talons, and I have done a bleed and frost build similar to this one before. For this we went with frost, fire, and faith though. So our main weapon has flaming strike with flame art, while our offhand has the chilling mist Ash of War. This gives us a decent amount of frost procs and allows multiple during battle due to the reset fire gives frost. This is also a fun straight sword build to run that combos Ashes of War with light attacks. If you're looking for a solid early game straight sword, the Warhawk's Talons are quite good, and on dexterity and faith will give you good damage. Now, straight swords are definitely a less used class in Elden Ring, and they can easily be beaten out by twin blades, curved swords, and the many types of jump attacks that we like to do. But if you're looking for something that takes a little bit more skill, and you want to mix in the Ashes of War with regular light attacks, maybe some heavy attacks, the Warhawk's Talons are actually solid. By the way, if you've been following to this point or you watch a lot of my content, definitely be sure to hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss out. We're going to cover DLC. We're going to keep Elden Ring fun. I also made a separate channel that's on my main page too, where I'm going to start doing some variety type gaming, Souls-like games and whatnot. But for this channel, we're going to keep Elden Ring going and hopefully really enjoy the upcoming DLC. Fromsoftware has rarely let us down with DLC, though Dark Souls 3 DLC is still probably my favorite, and it was truly phenomenal, so I'm going to hold Elden Ring's DLC to those same standards, if not maybe even possibly higher because of how good Elden Ring is. And after this dragon disappeared and reappeared somehow, yeah, if he goes outside of his arena, he just ends up back at the original spot. We're going to finish off this dragon with the Frost, Fire, and Faith build. By the way, since we are in Flame Art, if you want to mix in any incantations, anything Faith related, you have that too. This is a build with a lot of variety, because Faith in general has a ton of variety, so you can do as much as you want with that, maybe throw in different incantations or using the build. Let's get into equipment in a second for this build and setup on straight swords. For equipment, we have one Warhawk's Talon in Flame Art with Flaming Strike, the other one Chilling Mist, and I think Cold Affinity. We're using the Erdtree Seal because we're faith-based. We have the Knight's Cavalry set on, only the helm is altered. Broadwing Sword Insignia, Melissa's Prosthesis, Shard of Alexander, Fire Scorpion Charm, Fire Tier, Defense Tier. Let's get into stats. Now for buffs, once again we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. We have 70 Faith, 60 Vigor, and again we're in Flame Art, so we're going to get a lot of damage on the Warhawk's Talons with that, and then we can use Chilling Mist in the offhand for a well-rounded build. Build number 5 here is the Omen Cleaver Blood build. I never use bleed with heavy weapons much, usually opting for the 4 hits of the curved swords or twin blades. However, the bleed build up in combination with good damage makes the 64,000 HP the Fire Giant has on New Game Plus 7 pretty reasonable. You know, when I'm not completely missing the target by like a mile, even though he has a giant foot. But anyway, we're going to continue on with this build. You can see there, though, there's a lot of damage. We got enough bleed proc, and I think on each one of these Omen Cleavers, we're getting around 130 bleed. The amount of bleed procs I got, I was ultimately happy with, while also being decent on the jump attacks and heavy hits stamina wise. This build is a bit different than how I normally run bleed, and the Omen Cleavers are a bit of a quality weapon, but nevertheless they're still quite good in battle in blood affinity at rune level 150. I actually enjoyed running this type of bleed build because it ended up being a little bit of a challenge with a solid payoff. The fire giant would end up going down after we get into phase 2 here, decently easy on 2 attempts in total with the blood omen cleavers. Yeah, I know the fire giant can be challenging at times. He's actually one of the easier bosses for me now. Once you get to know his movesets, he's on the slow side. But overall, we're able to get a decent amount of bleed procs. And the second phase is always going to be a little bit more difficult because it's harder to hit his weak points. But you're going to see us again. We're going to be able to proc shortly here and do enough damage. And I think we even got a posture break in there, but posture breaking the fire giant in phase 2 isn't the best thing in the world. It actually puts you in like a suboptimal position when you're in front of him after you posture break him and get in the critical hit. You could end up in front of him and take a lot of damage. So I opted to just go behind him instead and continue damaging his feet and go for another bleed proc. Anyways, if you're looking for a heavy hitting weapon that does decent bleed, and if you want to rock 2 of them like I am here, these are certainly a reasonable option and one that I haven't covered before. All in all, these on a blood build was challenging and fun, decent damage, and a little bit harder than the typical twin blades and curved swords. I like that in this video too. We took on some late game bosses and stuff, mixed in a few side bosses, but we did take on some challenging bosses in this video with some different and unique builds. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have 2 Omen Cleavers in Blood Affinity. We're using Erdtree's Seal, which I didn't have the stats for, but apparently you can still do the buffs, so any seal will do. We had a random set of armor on. We're using the Raptor's Black Feathers, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Ritual Swords Talisman, Claw Talisman, Erdtree's Favorite +2, Green Burst Crystal Tier, Faith Tier. Let's get into stats. So there's 2 pathways here essentially because you can go Dexterity or Strength. It's really up to you. I opted for Strength, but generally speaking, it's a C in both when you're in Blood Affinity, and then we went for 45 Arcane for the soft cap for a well-rounded build for the Blood Omen Cleavers. The next build we have on here is the Sacred Curved Great Club Bonk build. This build is similar to my Prayerful Strike build, except with the great AR and scaling the Great Curved Club gets in Sacred Affinity. We can heal back any damage easily with Prayerful Strike, an amazing Ash of War to build around. If you have at least 51 poise, the Ash itself has reasonably good hyper armor as you can see on screen, so you can land and trade hits frequently without really having to heal. The healing is actually similar to the Blasphemous Blade, except this is a pure melee version, and one that will no doubt make you a strong force that can take down many of Eldenring's bosses. By the way, you could put this in heavy affinity too. Either way, you get back a ton in terms of healing. It has good hyper armor, and you can hit stuff really hard, getting those posture breaks too. Yeah, for some reason the Curved Great Club has really good damage in Sacred Affinity, even with the C scaling, and on top of that, you get good poise damage, and then you have solid hyper armor with the weapon, so it makes for a well-rounded build in Sacred Affinity with Prayerful Strike, and in a second here, we're going to go over equipment for this build. For equipment, we have this Sacred Curved Club with Prayerful Strike. We're using the Erdtree's Seal. We had a random set of armor on. We hit 51 poise. We have the Erdtree's Favorite +2, Ritual Swords Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Holy Tier, Faith Tier. Let's get into stats. For stats, we have 70 Faith again here, 60 Vigor, and we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength as our buffs for a well-rounded Great Curved Club build. The 7th build on this list is the Fire Iron Cleaver build. This is a powerful one because the Iron Cleaver gets a B in Flame Art. If you add Flaming Strike, you'll get around 700 AR per axe, and it makes for a powerful axe build. I do end up getting beat up here a little bit, but overall the Cleaver's moveset and reasonable speed is actually quite good. It even has a running up charge attack that's pretty unique too. Overall, the Iron Cleavers are something I'd recommend in battle to use if you're a fan of axes in Souls games. Sure, at times they're outclassed, but you can still make powerful builds with them and run them just like any other build. You can farm these at Castle Morn in the Weeping Peninsula very early into your Elden Ring journey. You can also grab Flaming Strike at Redmane Castle. It's on the outside of Redmane Castle. When you go around the side of the castle, you can grab that early too, put it on the Iron Cleaver, and get really good scaling from the start that ends up being a B scaling in the end for the Iron Cleavers when you're in Flame Art. And I definitely made a misstep there, no question, and yeah, I definitely shouldn't have taken that hit. I dodged, I think, a little bit too early there, too late. Anyways, as far as using these, I'm using them as kind of a jump attack build while mixing in Flaming Strike, but you can see the damage with Flaming Strike is good, and the damage on the jump attacks is good as well, because each one has 700 AR once they have fire on them. Yeah, overall, I really like these a lot. I like the Iron Cleavers. They're fun to use. I think I prefer the Bandit Curve Swords because you can get all that successive attack jump stuff. But overall, if you're using Flaming Strike and you like axe builds, this is definitely something to try out because of that B scaling in Flame Art. Definitely makes the Iron Cleavers viable if you're going to run an axe build. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have two Flame Art Iron Cleavers, both with Flaming Strike. We're using the Giant Seal. We have Malachi's Armor on. We have the Claw Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Fire Tier, Faith Tier. Let's get into stats for this one. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, we have 70 Faith. This is again another Faith-based build. We're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength for a well-rounded Fire Faith build. Now it's time for a full Frost Mage at rune level 150 that uses one of two moon spells, Adula's Moonblade and Glintstone Ice Crag. This is one that can impress for sure with minimal buffs, as I'm only using Golden Vow, Ash of War, and Terra Magica. You'll build up Frost from a distance with Glintstone Ice Crag, and then when you're up close you can use Adula's Moonblade for great damage too. Ronnie's Moon is the better choice, but I did not have it on this character as her moon will further contribute to Frost build-up and be increased by the Snow Witch hat. Make sure if you're running this build you have the hat for extra damage on Frost spells, as it makes a solid difference. Overall, this is a reliable and easy to understand mage build that once again shows why mages are easy mode in Elden Ring. Frost mages are particularly fun, and if you wanted to, you can add in the Dark Moon Greatsword as your main weapon as well. That would add in perfectly to complement a build focused entirely on Frost and Moon spells. This is a build that's certainly worth a try. And something that is reliable endgame as well, as you're going to see here on Beast Clergyman and Malachi. This works very well against them. Overall, they're decently resistant towards Frost, but you can get the Frost proc in, and then you can get extra damage, 20% more damage afterwards. And this could add in for some epic battles here. As you can see here, you can add in Adula's Moonblade is what I meant to say. And then Glintstone Ice Crag will be your ranged option. Now, it isn't the most ranged spell. It is kind of a medium range spell, but overall it's decent enough. Just keep your distance, stay at that medium range, use Glintstone Ice Crag, and then when you're up close, use Adula's Moonblade. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you're going to be happy with it because it's a pretty powerful build. Again, we didn't use a lot of buffs for this one at all. Just the Golden Vow, Ash of War as mentioned, and Terra Magica, and then 80 Intelligence for pretty much a pure mage build that shows off how powerful mages can be in Elden Ring. Yeah, they certainly have an advantage, that's for sure, as far as the end game goes. By the way, on my mage character, I'm going to be using him in the last clip because I think it was the only character that had Glintstone Kris on that I'm going to be covering. But overall, probably the easiest runs I've ever done through Elden Ring were as mage characters. They're so powerful, they're so reliable, and then even the Frost Mage stuff here, that pretty much no matter what you do when you're running the right mage build, you can do a ton of damage and take down bosses very easily when running setups like this. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have the Carrion Regal Scepter, we have the Golden Vow Ash of War Jellyfish Shield, we have the Snow Witch Hat on, random set of armor, Scarred Scourge Heirloom, Magic Scorpion Charm, Graven Mask Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Magic Tier, and I forgot to equip another tier. You can throw in whatever one you want. Let's get into stats. For stats, this is a pure intelligence build with not a lot of faith investment here, since we're just using the Golden Vow, Ash of War, and Terra Magica, and then 80 intelligence, 60 vigor for a well-rounded mage build. The next build we have here is the healer's build, and I know we're using the Blasphemous Blade. This time it's different though. Instead of focusing on damage, we're using Morgoth's Great Rune, Erdtree's Favor +2, and Blessings of the Erdtree to have great health regen, and in general make for a reliable healer's build. Yeah, with everything, by the way, I don't use great runes very often. You don't see them too often in my builds because typically I honestly most of the time forget about them, but whenever I use them, the best one to use in my opinion is Morgoth's Great Rune because of the fact that you get so much HP, and then Radahn's would probably be second to that. Commander Niall here, by the way, can be beaten by baiting his ranged jump and repeating that until victory. It has a very generous dodge window and you'll have plenty of time to land hits with the Blasphemous Blade. If he hits you, or any boss for that matter, you can regen with the Blasphemous Blade and having steady health regen from Blessings of the Erdtree as well. This is a solid combination that makes for a great healer's build that is extremely reliable on any New Game Plus cycle. Seriously, run a build like this and it's going to have reliability more than anything else, and you still get decent damage out of it, even though I'm only using I think one talisman in total to boost the Blasphemous Blade and everything else is focused on defense and healing. It still works out to be a very powerful build, and the Blasphemous Blade in general you pretty much never go wrong with. It's just amazing. The healing you get from that, the healing you get from Blessings of the Erdtree, and then just running that and having a little bit of defense too, to be kind of sturdy in most boss fights. And more important to the point, you can pretty much forget about your flash. You don't have to pay attention to your flash because you're not going to need them much for healing. You're going to be healing pretty much elsewhere with the Blasphemous Blade and Blessings of the Erdtree, so only like in emergency situations do you need those flasks. Most of the time, you can even put that into your FP flask because you're not going to need them much. Yeah, and that's definitely something worth trying out if you're ever having a hard time in Elden Ring. A build like this can pretty much save you from a lot of the tougher bosses in the game, because once you're hit, you can just take a step back, heal up, do whatever you need to do, and you don't even need the flash, just do it with the Blasphemous Blade. Here we took down Niall with a very, very reliable and pretty fun build too, with a funny looking Gideon setup. Let's get new equipment. For equipment, we have the Blasphemous Blade plus 10, we have the Erdtree Seal, we have Gideon set on with Lionel's Greaves, which ended up looking really funny, we have Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Ritual Shield Talisman, Erdtree's Favorite plus 2, Shard of Alexander, Fire Tier, Defense Tier. Let's get into stats for this one. And we're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blessings of the Erdtree. We also have Morgoth's Great Rune equipped for a lot of HP, and we have 60 Vigor, 70 Faith. And if you're having a hard time with any of the late game bosses, definitely feel free to try this setup. I've used this setup a couple times before when I was making a healer's build, and it's definitely reliable and something to use if you're having a difficult time. The last build on here is Glintstone Kris, a small pocket comet. This is an odd build because while it does great damage, it has the lack of range that the Glintstone Pebble Ash of War has. It's no doubt something that hits hard though, and when aiming at the dragon's head does a few thousand damage per quick comet. This doesn't compare to some of the comet spells, but it's on a dagger after all, and a dagger with excellent intelligence scaling and low requirements. This was one I never really did that much with until this video, and overall it ended up being a really fun build that was cool to pull off when you're at a mid-range. It doesn't quite have the distance of most spells, but as long as you keep close to mid-range, you can use this little pocket comet for a fair bit of damage, and most importantly, again, reliability. By the way, I have a list of all the different weapons in the game. Pretty much every single weapon in the game is on the list. I think I have all of them on the list now because I eventually hope to get to all of them. And I've easily covered over 100 weapons in Elden Ring, spells, all that stuff. If you have one that you want to see, put it in the comment section below. Comment what you would want to see that I haven't covered yet or haven't done a build for, and I'll definitely check it out. Yeah, I think by the end I'll end up covering probably all of the weapons in Elden Ring. I've even done a build for Vera's Bouquet. I've done pretty much a lot of builds for a lot of different weapons, tried to make them viable. Certain weapons really just aren't that good, but most of the weapons in Elden Ring you can make powerful enough builds for just by knowing how they scale and what the best affinities are. And after we took the dragon down here, we're going to be jumping into equipment for this build and setup with 200 stats and 150 stats. For equipment, we have Glintstone Kris, preferably plus 10. I thought I had it maxed out, apparently I didn't. Any steel and any staff will do. The Spellblade set will boost this. Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Magic Scorpion Charm, Graven Mass Talisman if you're adding in some spells, Magic Tier, Infinite FP Tier. Let's get into stats. And my mage is at level 200, so there's the 200 stats if you were curious and you have a higher level character. And then in a second here, we're going to get into the 150 stats as well, which is the same concept. And that right there, we have 80 intelligence, 50 vigor, 25 mind, 20 endurance for a well-rounded build around Glintstone Kris. That's my top 10 new Elden Ring builds I've never done before, as it's part of a list of all the weapons as I mentioned before in the game I'm getting around to slowly. Elden Ring is a fantastic game, and we should soon hear word of the inevitable DLC. It may be less than a week away after all. I'm really excited for that. By the time this video is posted, could be like 4 days. We'll see. Definitely be sure to sub to this channel for Elden Ring content. Comment below if there's a build you want to see, and have a wonderful day.